Hi, this is Paul LaMonica, and welcome to the West Haven Virtual Ghost Tour. Tonight's story is not a ghost story per se. It is a story of murder and mayhem in Victorian New Haven, and it led to the trial of the century in New Haven, the trial of the 19th century. Tonight we are going to tell the story of the murder of Jen Cramer. On August 6, 1881, a clam fisherman walking on the sandbar in West Haven came upon the body of a beautiful young girl. Initial investigation assumed that she had either committed suicide or had accidentally drowned, but an autopsy revealed that there was no water in her lungs and she had been violently raped 24 to 48 hours before her death. She was identified as Jen Cramer. Jen Cramer, who was the daughter of a cigar merchant in New Haven, was considered New Haven's debutante, the belle of New Haven, the most eligible young lady in all of the city. It was well known that she was vivacious. She was something of a flirt. She was forward in the terms of Victorian America, which meant she was willing to talk to boys before they talked to her. By all accounts, she was looking for a rich husband. But she was also considered to be virtuous and very much considered still a virgin at this point. It was well known that she wanted to find a rich husband and socially move up in New Haven. Now, in the summer of 1881, Jen had found perhaps the man of her dreams. His name was James Malley, and he was the nephew of Edward Malley. Anybody who grew up in New Haven remembers the Edward Malley Company. It was one of the most successful businesses in New Haven for more than 100 years, a family business, a department store. So Jen Cramer was now about to be courted by the nephew of the richest family in town. It would have been very, very untoward, very inappropriate for Jen Cramer to be courted without an appropriate chaperone. But in the summer of 1881, she was chaperoned by James's older cousin Walter and Walter's fiancee Blanche Douglas. And Blanche Douglas, by all accounts, was a socialite from Long Island. So the four young people spent their time going around town, going to the night spots, enjoying their lives and living the lives of bon vivants, with the idea, of course, that they would all end up marrying. Now, on August 4th, when both the Malley boys and Blanche Douglas were questioned, on what they told the story was on August 3rd, Blanche Douglas got sick. She was out to dinner with the four were out to dinner. She got sick and they retreated back to the Malley mansion. And when they got to the Malley mansion, Blanche was too ill to return home. So it was decided that they would stay in the Malley mansion. The ladies would stay on one half of it. The boys would stay on the other half of it to make sure that nothing inappropriate occurred. The next morning, the morning of August 4th, Blanche and Jen left the mansion. Blanche now feeling better. They arrived at Jen's house where her mother was furious that she had spent the night away from home, even under the circumstances that she described. But she assured her mother that she still had her virtue and that no one could say otherwise. She stormed out of the house with this fight with her mother. And the next time anybody was willing to admit that they had seen her, it was August 6th, and she was dead. Now, the police had some questions about this story. There were some people who said that they had seen Jen Cramer at the White City at Savin Rock on August 5th, the evening before she died. And the varying witnesses' accounts caused the police to focus on the Malleys as potentially having committed foul play. Blanche Douglas had a secret that the police soon learned. Blanche Douglas was not a socialite from Long Island. Blanche Douglas was a prostitute, and Walter Malley had met her in a bordello in New York. He had fallen in love with her. He had brought her to New Haven. He created a fictitious story about her origins, set her up in an apartment, and was dating her, by all accounts, was completely enamored of her. But the police knew that if her true origins were exposed, that would ruin her in New Haven society. And so they put pressure on her to tell a different story. And Blanche quickly cracked under the pressure. She now told the police that James was getting frustrated with the fact that his vivacious, flirty girlfriend was not willing to sleep with him. He wanted to seduce her. She would maintain her virtue. She said only if they were engaged or married would she consider sleeping with him. And he was getting aggravated with the situation. So he, Blanche, and Walter hatched a plot to allow him to seduce Jen. Blanche Douglas wasn't sick the night before, the night that they spent the evening in the Malley mansion. As a matter of fact, it was Jen who had been fed wine and had gotten drunk. And what Blanche said is she, of course, retreated to Walter's room to go to bed. James had carried Jen to his bed. And during the night, Jen had heard, Jen had said no and stop. And Blanche had heard her cry in the night. So now, based on this evidence, the police decided to arrest Walter and James on account of murder. And the story that they told that the police believed it happened was this. After, clearly the night before Jen Cramer returned home, the night of August 3rd, she had been raped by James. When she returned home after the brutal assault and had her mother talk about her virtue, she became infuriated, stormed out of the house. She went back to the Malley mansion, according to the police, and met James, told him that now that he had ruined her, he had to marry her. If he did not marry her, she was going to tell the tale that he had ruined her, that he had seduced her, that he had raped her, that he was a cad, and that he had no place in New Haven society. And that would have destroyed his reputation. But Jen really didn't know what she was dealing with James Malley. She thought that she was dealing with a young boy who had made a mistake. She wasn't dealing with that. She was dealing with a monster. James sat her down and said, okay, we can talk about this. He poured her a drink. He laced the drink with arsenic. He gave it to her. He watched her die. And then after she died, he threw her in the sea. That was the story that the police were going to tell. And an autopsy did reveal that there was arsenic in her system and that it wasn't from the habitual use that women of the day sometimes used arsenic as a, to change the color of their skin and their complexion as makeup. No, it was arsenic. It was poison. And so now that was going to be the case against James and Walter. The trial, unfortunately, was something of a farce. First of all, basically the Malleys had a ton of money. And so they started off by finding witnesses who were saying that no, it wasn't James who was with Jen on the night before she died. James had witnesses who said he was home the night before he died. The witnesses who did see Jen and James suddenly had their memory become hazy and foggy. And then the judge made a ruling that said the only charge that would be allowed to be considered was murder. The jury could not consider rape. They could not consider assault. They could not consider manslaughter, which meant the prosecution had to prove that there was premeditation involved. And that was simply too high a barrier of proof. And therefore, the boys were acquitted and the case remained unsolved. The Malleys celebrated with a party. Edward Malley was quoted as, well, boys will be boys. And there was a dime store pamphlet of the story in lurid detail that went through 2 printings because the Malleys bought out the first printing thinking that they could keep it from the public. So another printing was made and the Malleys realized that they were going to be forced to have their reputations ruined. The death of Jen Cramer led to many other tragedies. Her father committed suicide during the trial. Her mother became insane and eventually killed herself as well. And in the middle of this time, the Malley store burned to the ground. And it was arson investigation, and Jimmy was charged with the arson, and the insurance did not pay. Now, obviously, the Malleys were able to build their business because that business stayed in New Haven until the until the late 70s and the early 80s. But Jen Cramer's murder was never found. Blanche Douglas disappeared, and the murder remains unsolved to this day. So that is the story of the great murder mystery of the 19th century in New Haven. Not a ghost story, but a tale of murder and mayhem. Thank you.